made in a lab, and people are ready for the jab. But what's taking so long? Millions await their chance for a potentially life-saving shot in the arm. But why are folks in the UK getting it so much quicker than those in the EU? I'm Ali Aslan, and today's newsmaker is the uneven rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines. "91-year-old Margaret Keenan was, for one day last December, quite possibly the most famous woman on earth. Millions watched as the British grandmother from Coventry, dressed in her Christmas jumper, became the first person to receive the coronavirus vaccine. As people around the world breathed a collective sigh of relief they would soon be next, hopes rose that an end to the pandemic was in sight. But since then, optimism has turned to desperation, as the number of dead and infected across Europe and the UK skyrockets, while new, more transmissible strains spread. So, how did the UK become vaccination nation, and why are the 27 countries in the EU left waiting? Adam Platz fills us in.
The race is on, not just between the virus and the vaccines, but also for countries to be the fastest to vaccinate. The UK was the quickest out of the blocks, approving the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine in early December. It has since approved 2 more, including the homegrown Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine.
The miracle of scientific endeavour, much of it right here in the UK, has given us not only the sight of the finish line, but a clear route to get there. After the marathon of last year, we are indeed now in a sprint, a race to vaccinate the vulnerable faster than the virus can reach them, and every needle in every arm makes a difference.
The Prime Minister says by mid-January, the UK will have the capacity to deliver hundreds of thousands of doses a day at hospitals, pharmacies, and 7 massive vaccination centres. Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, and the US started after the UK, but have now vaccinated more people per capita than any other countries. But in Europe, with the exception of Denmark, progress has been much slower. EU nations agreed to jointly procure vaccines, securing more than 2 billion doses from 7 manufacturers to be distributed equally and at the same time among the EU's population.
We are well prepared. We have developed a common European vaccination strategy. This shows again how it is better to learn from 27 together than to go it alone.
The EU Commission President may have been unable to resist taking a jab at Brexit, but now it's EU states that are asking why their jabs are taking so long. France has been among the slower European countries to administer its quota of EU-procured vaccinations. In its first 3 days, it injected only 138 doses. According to an Ipsos poll, it also has one of the most vaccine-skeptical populations in Europe.
We are the only country that offers a 45 or 50-page booklet with a pre-vaccination consultation to authorise consent, sign documents, administration, all for what? For an action that is going to take 30 seconds, that we, doctors, nurses, have been doing every day for years. We've made it extremely complicated, whereas it can be much simpler.
Some are asking whether the UK, now outside the EU, has been able to race ahead quicker as a result of Brexit. But if Europe is moving slowly, many developing countries are yet to even receive vaccinations, which NGOs have partly blamed on wealthy nations reserving more vaccinations than they need. Whether in Europe or elsewhere, the speed of vaccination rollout is key to both saving lives and for life to go back to normal. Adam Platz, The Newsmakers.
So, what's behind the slow rollout in the EU? Let's ask our guest. Joining me now from London is Roy Lilley. He's a former NHS Chairman and a health policy analyst. In Coventry, we have Professor Lawrence Young. He's an infectious disease expert at the University of Warwick. And in Paris is co-founder at OT Med's Observatory and health activist Pauline Londeix. Pauline, the numbers don't lie. The EU is certainly off to a very slow start when it comes to vaccines. As a matter of fact, it is trailing behind the UK, the US, and even Israel, a nation of only 9 million people, which has vaccinated more of its citizens than all EU member states combined. You are joining us from France, a nation that also is certainly trailing and lagging behind. What do you attribute due to this?
Good evening to everybody. Thank you for the invitation. So what do we attribute to the slow motion of France on vaccines? I think there is, of course, the issue of purchasing vaccines, of buying the vaccine, producing it. But clearly here with France, we see that there is also a big logistic problem, big issue around how these doses are administered and why is it taking so long. I think, unfortunately, we have to put it also on the current government's inability to be able to really coordinate, to think of a vaccine strategy in France. We, our organization, has been denouncing and being a little bit worried about the way the government has been working on this vaccine strategy for a few months already. Always reacting rather than anticipating and planning the events. And I think, unfortunately, the very slow number of people that have been vaccinated so far in France is once again symptomatic of this lack of coordination of the government.
And certainly there is no lack of finger pointing going on. Governments have been criticized for the delays in the rollout. They in turn are pointing the finger towards the European Commission. Roy, the UK, quite the opposite, has given jabs to around 1 million people already. And some people even attribute it to Brexit. They're saying, see, this is the sovereignty that we talked about. We're no longer bound to wait for 27 other nations to get their act together. Do you think they have a point?
Well, health policy is a delegated responsibility under the European Union anyway. So each country is responsible for its own healthcare, the funding of it and the policy of it. So the European Union, whilst they have used their bulk buying capacity to buy vaccinations, they don't have any say in the strategy. I think we, in the UK, we've managed to do it quickly, firstly because the government stepped in and bought the vaccinations before they were made, really, and certainly before they were approved. And secondly, the MHRA, which is our regulatory body, actually worked with the vaccine manufacturers to assess their data pretty much as it came off the computer. You know, they were working alongside them. Normally, a pharmaceutical company will do its research, accumulate the data, and then present it to the MHRA. Here, they worked pretty much alongside each other. So we have been able to produce it more quickly. I think I don't think it's probably very much to do with Brexit, but I do think that there was an impetus in our government having taken us out of the European Union to prove that we would not be held back by the fact that we weren't in the European Union. So it's a rather reverse strategy. And I think the government acted quickly. A lot of the research, of course, was done here as well. Many of our trusts are hospital university trusts, and many of them have links with the pharmaceutical industry, particularly, of course, in Oxford, where the AstraZeneca vaccination has been developed. So I think it's a combination of a number of things.
Lawrence, the EU countries have essentially agreed to let the Commission, the European Commission, handle the negotiations. The thinking behind, of course, being that EU countries will secure a better deal by negotiating as a bloc. Seeing the result now as it is, do you think that was a mistake?
It looks like it's going to be challenging. We know that supply and demand is going to be a real issue with these vaccines. I mean, in the UK, obviously, the government have reserved a large number of doses of each of the now 3 approved vaccines and did that ahead of time. What type of priority that gets in relation to other countries within the EU is anybody's guess. All we know is there's going to be an enormous bottleneck in terms of the manufacture and provision of these vaccines. And of course, there are issues associated particularly with refrigeration requirements for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. So all these things are going to add up. And perhaps the only way to deal with this is for each country to look very carefully at the infrastructure it needs to have in place, not only in terms of accessing supplies of the different vaccines, but also implementing a mass vaccination program across their citizens.
Pauline, judging by the very slow start that the EU is off to, should the countries have purchased and approved vaccines themselves? Do you think each individual country like Germany or France have been held back by the European Commission?
I don't think that the European Commission's pool procurement is the major problem. I think what we have seen is that, the states, including European member states countries, including the European also investment banks, have contributed to the research and development of these vaccines, of most of the vaccines candidates being developed. But what we have been seeing in the past months is the European Commission reacting by buying doses of vaccines following to the announcement of pharmaceutical companies. Maybe it would have been a good strategy to think in a different way, which was to see at all the vaccine candidates that were being developed and for which a lot of public European money had been invested, and see how these different vaccine candidates could be used in a complementary way as different tools that we would need and that would be helpful for the vaccinations. For instance, we know that the Moderna candidate has some characteristics that are different than the Pfizer-BioNTech one. So what we are missing is to see a kind of coordinated strategy in which the different vaccine candidates could have been used together. And in the opposite, we have seen member state countries reacting to the announcement of pharmaceutical companies, being the reaction. So that's a little bit one of our concerns.
Roy, certainly the situation right now is a peculiar one where, despite being developed in Germany, for instance, the BioNTech jab has received the first approval in the UK and the US. And Germany now, a country where the jab was actually developed, finds itself being short of the BioNTech jab. The BioNTech CEO Ur Şahin himself has said that the process in the EU is not as fast and straightforward as it is in other countries. Hard to believe, no? I mean, for 12 months, we've talked about nothing else but this vaccine. And now that it's here, we're not fully prepared.
I am surprised how slow the European Union has been to react and grant approval. And it is interesting. I mean, the MHRA, our regulatory body, gave approval very quickly for the reasons that I explained a moment or two ago. They've been working with the manufacturers. It would have been simple for the European Union to say, well, the MHRA, the regulatory body in the UK, has a very good reputation. If they've approved it for use in the UK, then we'll just adopt that approval and use it in Europe. But no, they wanted to do their own approval, which slowed everything down. So you can see really, on the one hand, the European countries working together should speed things up. But actually, it's not been in this case. It's not happened. The MHRA has been very, very quick out of the blocks.
And certainly the displeasurement, Lawrence, amongst the European population is growing. The countries have seemed unprepared. They still seem unprepared to roll out the jab quickly. Again, this is a topic that has single-handedly dominated the news agenda for 12 months straight. And now that it's here, the European Commission seems to have not ordered enough, trying to play a certain game, perhaps even playing off one jab developer against the other. Good governance, this is not, is it?
It's very challenging. It's very challenging, not least because all of our healthcare systems and structures are under such enormous pressure as it is. So one of the issues that we've got, even with the initial success we're having in the UK with vaccinations and the announcement today of 7 mass vaccination centres up and down the country, in England anyway, is that the healthcare system is creaking because it's overwhelmed with cases of COVID-19. So I think for each country, there's a real challenge here and a real battle, if you like, between infection and injection. We're dealing with a new highly transmissible variant of the virus. And this is putting additional pressure on our systems anyway. I think we've been quite fortunate in the UK, not only having the MHRA do this rolling review, as Roy has said, and getting on with approving this, but also being able to utilize our hospitals and our primary care practices to get the vaccine out there. But there's a cost to that. And the cost is, for instance, in primary care, our GPs cannot deal with routine health issues because they're preoccupied with vaccination. So none of this is by any stretch of the imagination perfect, but it is a concern, particularly I think for countries in the EU, that we need to get vaccines out there as soon as possible. It's the only way to get out of our current situation, get vaccinations working, get test, trace, and isolate working, and get as many people to adhere to restrictions and to making sure they're being careful about person-to-person contacts. It's a very, very challenging time.
Indeed. And the vaccination level, Pauline, in Europe up until now is quite low. But even by European standards, France is actually at quite the bottom of it, hasn't even gotten off to a start next to the Netherlands. What do you attribute this to? Is perhaps France more vaccine skeptical? What challenges are you seeing in your country?
The problem in our country, in France, is that the government has been very behind, very low, very not reactive at all during all the crises. We have to remember that last April, it was impossible in France for citizens, including me, to find any mask anywhere. And the government was saying masks are useless. We had the same situation with testing, and we had shortages of tests. And the government was saying tests are not useful. And also we had the shortages of medicines. And once again, the government was very low to reply, to answer. So unfortunately, at every stage of the crisis so far, we have seen a government and a health system extremely slow to reply and to take the concrete measures that we needed. So unfortunately, we had, as you mentioned, we had 1 year now almost to get ready for the arrival of the vaccine. So it's quite unbelievable that we are so behind in terms of the number of people being vaccinated so far. But unfortunately for us in France, for citizens, it is not it's not such a surprise, unfortunately.
Roy, per capita, the countries that have been leading the pack as far as the rollout is concerned, Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, I mean, they all have one thing in common, of course. They are small countries with a small population, relatively small compared to the UK, France, or Germany. But are there still lessons to be learned for European countries, to the UK, the US, nonetheless, from those countries?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think there are lessons for all of us to learn from each other. I think the single thing for me is that the UK is a national health service. It's a single point of distribution. It's a single point of guidance. It's a single point, if the NHS says we need to do this, then it gets done. We have a strong primary care network, which we mobilized very quickly. I mean, they're used to doing flu vaccinations every year, so they're kind of used to doing vaccines, not on this scale, but they're used to doing vaccines. So it's the combination of having a national system that the government control and mobilize very quickly, and having a strong primary care system to kick us off. Now, as Lawrence says, we are opening up bigger centres, and we will be bringing in volunteer vaccinators. But we were able to get vaccinating the very vulnerable very quickly through the primary care network. And I think that's something that it's a lesson really for all healthcare systems. The World Health Organization is always very critical of our system for the way it's funded, but it's also always very complimentary about its primary care system. And I think that has been exemplified now with COVID, and it's very clear. National system and primary care is really important.
Lawrence, same question to you. What lessons can we derive from those countries that have gotten off to a quick start?
It's quite interesting if you look at Israel. I mean, it is a smaller country, of course, But if you look at the way it's got its integrated healthcare system, and as Roy says, that's one benefit we have in the United Kingdom. The other interesting thing I think about Israel is they have electronic records and electronic health cards for each citizen. So being able to identify, trace individuals, make sure that once they've had the first jab, they come back for the second, which is really important. That's a more integrated approach to healthcare. So I think there are going to be some enormous lessons to learn, not only about vaccination, but about the public health infrastructures in our different countries. And certainly we're learning those lessons in spades in the United Kingdom.
Pauline, the EU now has struck a deal to double its supply of the Pfizer vaccine to a total of 600 million doses. Well, some silver lining, no? It seems that the European Union, the European Commission, has realized their mistake and are trying to do good at this particular point.
Well, so it's probably good that there is this purchase of Pfizer vaccine now by the European Commission. But clearly here we know that there is, I think it was the Spiegel in Germany who released that information, that Sanofi, that France and Germany disagreed on the numbers of doses to buy of the Pfizer vaccine, because France also wanted Sanofi vaccine to be purchased. So there are also this kind of things at stake, and this is a problem because in the end it damages public health policies, and it doesn't go in the direction of public policies. Once again, I think it's very important to remember that a lot of public money has been invested for each of these vaccines developments, and therefore they should be fully available and widely available.
Roy, it's often said when it comes to COVID-19 and the vaccines in particular that no country is safe until we all are safe. So there's really no reason reason here for Schadenfreude, is there? No government should play politics with it, pointing towards other countries and regions in saying, well, you know, we're doing so much better than you are.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to make. You're quite right. No one's safe until we're all safe. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is being manufactured at a cost basis, not for profit. And that, I suspect, will be the vaccine that will find its way around the world quickest, in addition to the fact that the Pfizer vaccine is so very difficult for the supply chain, requiring the super refrigeration and so on. So you're absolutely right. And I think the British government has already indicated it will buy vaccines for distribution in the third world as well. So, yes, we're all in this together, and we can only get out of this together.
Lawrence, clearly there's a huge thirst and demand for jabs at this particular point, as they will determine our future lives, immediate and in the long term. Do you think that the race for vaccines on the part of Europe, the UK, the US, is going to come at the expense of poorer countries, poorer regions?
Well, I sincerely hope not. We know that the World Health Organization, through COVAX, is doing its best to raise enough resource to ensure that the poorer countries also receiving vaccine. We know that's going to be challenging, not only in terms of vaccine supply, but as Roy's alluded to, it might be much easier to use the more traditional vaccine approaches rather than the RNA technology. And there are vaccines also from other countries. And we know that countries like Russia have been looking at working with India to develop vaccines and to provide their vaccines. China's doing likewise. So what we have is several different vaccines, all at different levels of approval, all in different healthcare systems across the world. And making comparisons is very difficult. But I do think that Russia and China will be able to provide some of their vaccines perhaps more effectively to developing countries, not least because they are cheap and they're setting up manufacture within countries like India.
Pauline, before we go, just a quick assessment on your part. Realistically speaking, Europe consists of approximately 500 million people. By when do you think the predominant majority of Europeans will have received the vaccine?
It's impossible. I think it's impossible to predict. It depends on the vaccine strategy of the different governments in different countries, because, as it has been said, it's not only about the purchase of the doses and the supply of the doses, but it's also about how they are getting to people in countries. So there are these challenges. But to go back to the issue of poor countries, I think there is a big challenge here. And I think Amnesty International mentioned that 9 people out of 10 in developing countries will not receive a vaccine in this year, in 2021. So we have to really think about this, because, as it has been said, we are all together in this response to this pandemic, and we need for people to have a wide access in the world, not only in the Western European countries.
Global unity counts more than ever. Roy Lilley, Lawrence Young, and Pauline Londeix, thank you so much for participating and providing some insights into the rollout of vaccines. And that's all for this edition of The Newsmakers. I'm Ali Aslan. Thanks for watching.